The first thing to understand about ancient Rome is that it was more than an empire of stone armies and senators. It was an empire of rules, rules so precise, so ingrained, that even people living 2,000 years later find themselves following them without thinking. Some of these rules were practical, born of necessity. Others were arbitrary, designed to consolidate power or reinforce hierarchy. Yet, over centuries, they became invisible scripts embedded in human behavior, social structures, and even thought itself. One of the most remarkable things about Rome is how its ideas survived. Its laws and rituals didn't vanish with the fall of the empire, they mutated. They traveled through the Middle Ages, filtered through the Renaissance, passed down in governments, education systems, religious institutions, and everyday life. And long after the emperors were dust, the echoes of Roman rules continued to dictate how humans think, act, and organize the world. Take for example, the Roman obsession with order and hierarchy. The Romans loved structure. Every citizen had a place, every role a responsibility, and every action a consequence. The streets of Rome were meticulously organized, the legal system painstakingly codified, and social roles rigidly defined. Today, we still live in systems shaped by these ideas. Our schools, workplaces, and governments function on the premise that structure ensures efficiency. Punctuality, obedience, and protocol feel natural because Rome conditioned civilizations to operate within such frameworks. Even our language is infused with Roman influence. Legal terminology, political offices, and the very concept of civic duty descend from Roman thinking. We don't notice it because it feels normal. But it's a shadow of a civilization that demanded conformity. The rules of Rome were also designed to make people complicit in their own control. Romans understood that if a person internalized a rule, enforcement became unnecessary. Citizens would follow norms not because someone threatened them with punishment, but because they believed it was the right way to live. This is why we still follow certain arbitrary conventions today: lines in bureaucracy, formal titles, dress codes, social etiquette. Many of these practices make little logical sense in a modern context. Yet we adhere to them because centuries of inherited thinking have made them seem inevitable. Rome taught the world that control works best when it is invisible, internalized, and unquestioned. Consider the Roman legal system, for instance. It was incredibly detailed and comprehensive, covering everything from property disputes to family law to criminal conduct. Some of these laws were rational and necessary. Others were designed more to maintain social order than justice. Yet the principle of codifying behavior became a standard that persists today. Modern legal frameworks, from civil codes to municipal regulations, follow the idea that every action must be accounted for, categorized, and judged according to precedent. Even traffic rules, zoning laws, or bureaucratic forms carry traces of Roman logic. We obey them because we assume they are essential, even when they are not. Rome taught us to trust the system, and trust became second nature. Another rule Rome imposed, and one that lingers, is the regulation of social roles. The Romans obsessed over who belonged where. Citizens had privileges, slaves had restrictions, senators had authority. Women were confined to certain spaces and responsibilities. People were expected to perform roles that reinforced social order. Today, while society has radically changed in some areas, traces of this remain. People are categorized, labeled, and sorted by job title, educational attainment, social status, or even personality traits. These categories feel natural, even comforting. Because Rome conditioned civilizations to assign identity based on external expectations. We rarely question whether the boxes themselves are necessary. Instead, we simply inhabit them. Even the rituals of daily life were governed by Roman rules. Romans had precise habits for meals, worship, hygiene, and social interaction. These habits were partly practical but partly symbolic, designed to reinforce hierarchy, discipline, and conformity. Think of the modern equivalents. Standardized work hours, formal dining etiquette, office hierarchies, and ceremonial protocols in government. They all echo the idea that order is maintained not just through law, but through ritualized behavior. Rome showed that repetition shapes obedience, that habitual action normalizes control. Religion in Rome also served as a tool for behavioral regulation. The pantheon of gods, the festivals, the ceremonies, all reinforced social norms. Participation wasn't just spiritual, it was civic. Observing rituals signaled loyalty, obedience, and alignment with societal expectations. Even after Rome fell, religious practices in Europe absorbed and adapted many of these structures. Clergy, congregations, feast days, and processions all carried the same dual-purposey spiritual meaning and social control. The lesson survived belief, when combined with ritual channels human behavior. Romans also understood the power of visibility. Public behavior mattered as much as private belief. The streets of Rome, the forums, the amphitheaters, all were spaces where conformity could be observed and enforced socially. Reputation was currency. Shame was as powerful as punishment today. Social media echoes this principle. Our lives are curated, performed, and judged in public operate as mechanisms of control. Rome trained the world to monitor itself, and the world continues to follow that training. Even time was structured by Rome. The Roman calendar, the division of months, the naming of days, and the concept of leisure versus work, all imposed a temporal order. Modern schedules, deadlines, and workweeks reflect this logic. We feel compelled to adhere to the clock, to respect official timing, to align our lives with structured segments. Few question whether these divisions are natural. They simply are, because Rome taught the world to organize life around standardized time. The Romans also codified ideas about citizenship and civic responsibility that still echo today. Citizenship was both privilege and duty. Civic engagement, military service, and loyalty to the state were enforced as obligations, not merely suggestions. Modern societies inherited these expectations in the form of taxes, civic duties, voting, and legal obligations. Even our sense of civic morality, doing the right thing for society, descends from a Roman blueprint. Obedience to society feels natural, but it is historically inherited. One of the most enduring legacies, perhaps, is the Roman approach to law, order, and punishment. Romans believed that visibility, precedent, and consistency were crucial to maintaining obedience. Public trials, punishments, and ceremonies were designed to be witnessed, remembered, and internalized. Modern court systems, penalties, and even educational disciplinary measures carry forward this logic. People follow rules not just because they fear punishment, but because they understand the consequences are predictable and socially enforced. Rome trained people to anticipate structure and adjust behavior accordingly. Social conformity, ritualized life, codified law, and hierarchical roles, these are not relics, they are living systems. We walk through cities built on Roman grids, speak languages infused with Roman legal and political terminology, navigate bureaucracies shaped by Roman codification, and obey schedules and rules that echo their obsession with order. The empire fell, but its architecture of behavior endured. Every day, in subtle ways, we live within structures Rome created, yet many of these rules survive without purpose. We follow them blindly, simply because they exist. Traffic signs, office protocols, dress codes, holidays, and even notions of professionalism are all modern descendants of Roman control. Few consider their origins, even fewer question their relevance. Rome's genius was to make rules feel inevitable, natural, and unquestionable. Its legacy is not merely in law or architecture, it is in the way humans organize, think, and obey. As we continue, we will see that these rules are not just remnants, they are living systems, influencing how we behave, think, and perceive reality. And many are still followed today, not out of understanding, but out of habit, fear, and inherited belief. Rome did not need to maintain its empire physically. Its empire survives in the minds of those who follow its invisible rules, sometimes knowingly, but often unconsciously. In essence, the story of Rome is the story of us. Every law, ritual, and social expectation we inherit is a thread connecting us to an empire long gone. We still walk in its shadows, still act under its influence, still perform its ancient scripts. Understanding these rules is the first step in recognizing their hold, and the first step in imagining life beyond them. Rome's rules endure because humans adopted them, not because they are eternal. And recognizing this is the key to questioning them, bending them, or choosing not to follow them at all. That is the beginning of awareness. That is the beginning of freedom. That is the first chapter of the story of ancient Rome's enduring influence. One of the key mechanisms Rome employed was the normalization of hierarchy. Romans believed that society functioned best when everyone knew their place. Citizens, freedmen, slaves, senators, and emperors all had clearly defined roles. These roles were not only social but psychological. People internalized expectations and measured themselves against them. In modern life, this principle persists subtly. Job titles, educational achievements, and even social media status create invisible ladders. We climb, compare, and judge ourselves and others, often without questioning why these ladders exist, or whether they serve our purpose. Rome created the blueprint, we inherited the structure. Another mechanism of Roman influence is the codification of behavior into formal rules. Roman laws were famously detailed, covering virtually every aspect of life: commerce, property, marriage, religion, and civic duties. While many rules were functional, others were arbitrary, designed to reinforce authority and social order. Modern regulations, whether municipal ordinances, workplace protocols, or bureaucratic procedures, follow the same logic. We obey them not always because they make sense, but because we have been conditioned to believe that adherence equals correctness. Rome taught the world that law is not just a tool for justice. It is a tool for shaping behavior. The Romans also relied heavily on ritual as a means of control. Public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formalized social interactions reinforced social cohesion and obedience. Participation in these rituals was expected and visible, signaling loyalty and reinforcing the hierarchy. Today, modern equivalents exist in meetings, corporate events, standardized schooling, and even holiday traditions. Ritual continues to structure our daily lives, shaping the way we dress, speak, interact, and even celebrate. What feels natural or traditional is often a reflection of centuries of inherited social engineering. Public visibility was another crucial mechanism. Romans understood that social surveillance was as powerful as legal enforcement. Conduct in public spaces, forums, markets, was monitored by peers, reinforcing norms. Shame, reputation, and honor served as social enforcement tools. Modern societies mirror this through literal and digital public spaces, social media, professional networking, and communal reputation. We perform for observers, often unconsciously internalizing their judgment. Rome's principle endures. People will police themselves when the gaze of others is present. Education was another channel through which Roman rules survived. Roman education emphasized rhetoric, discipline, and memorization over inquiry or creativity. Students learned to respect authority, follow patterns, and master form over content. Modern education systems, though more expansive, still emphasize conformity, testing, and measurable outcomes. Students are trained to succeed within predefined parameters, reinforcing the idea that success is about compliance and measurable achievement rather than exploration. Rome's pedagogy, intentionally or not, created citizens predisposed to accept social norms unquestioningly. Rome's rules also encoded expectations around time and productivity. The division of days, hours, and seasons in the Roman calendar, along with scheduled civic duties, instilled a sense of temporal order that survives in modern routines. Workweeks, deadlines, school schedules, and even the obsession with punctuality reflect this inheritance. Time itself became a tool to shape behavior, disciplining people into rhythms that reinforce social order. We feel compelled to adhere to these schedules, often assuming they are natural, when in fact they are deeply historical constructs. Another key Roman mechanism was the use of symbols and architecture to reinforce authority. Temples, forums, aqueducts, and statues were not only functional, they conveyed power, permanence, and hierarchy. Modern equivalents persist in the way office buildings, government complexes, and urban design signal authority. Architecture communicates who is in control and who is expected to follow, a subtle but enduring Roman legacy. The Romans were also masters of creating invisible consequences. Laws, rituals and expectations were backed by social, economic, or political repercussions, many of which were internalized. People learned to anticipate judgment, criticism, or loss of status if they failed to comply. Modern societies continue this pattern. Performance reviews, social media feedback, academic grading, and professional evaluations all reinforce norms. We follow rules not merely because they are enforced externally, but because we have internalized the cost of non-compliance. Rome perfected the art of self-regulation. Even concepts of justice are shaped by Roman logic. Romans emphasized retribution and order over rehabilitation or restoration. Justice was public and visible, often symbolic, designed to reinforce social norms rather than achieve equity. Modern systems retain elements of this approach. We are conditioned to see punishment as a natural response to transgression, to equate consequence with morality. The assumption that systems define right and wrong is a direct legacy of Roman thought. Social roles were reinforced not just by law but by expectation and repetition. Romans expected citizens to perform duties to their family, community, and state. Compliance was rewarded socially and morally. Today, social expectation continues to dictate behavior. Norms about family, work, gender, and citizenship carry implicit rules. People adhere not because they are codified, but because deviation risks social judgment. Rome trained humans to obey both law and culture, and this dual inheritance remains powerful. Another mechanism of influence was the Roman obsession with precedent. Past decisions, rituals, and customs were honored as models for the future. Innovation was tolerated only when it did not threaten order. Modern society mirrors this in law, bureaucracy, and organizational policy. Decisions are justified by what has always been done, creating stability but limiting imagination. Rome taught us to revere precedent, often over reason or efficiency. Romans also understood the power of normalization. By repeatedly practicing a behavior or enforcing a rule, they made it feel natural. Ordinary citizens accepted complex hierarchies, convoluted procedures, and social institutions as normal because repetition created comfort with familiarity. Modern life is saturated with this same principle: commuting routines, business protocols, social etiquette, and institutional procedures feel inevitable, because we have repeated and inherited them over generations. Rome taught the world that the more habitual a rule, the less it is questioned. The regulation of leisure and public space is another subtle legacy. Romans structured festivals, public baths, and recreational activities to enforce norms and maintain order. Leisure was never entirely free, it was a controlled environment that reinforced hierarchy and social roles. Modern equivalents persist in how organized sports, cultural events, and public spaces are managed, often subtly teaching conformity, discipline, and expectation. The idea that even pleasure should be structured and observed is Roman at its core. Even in personal life, Rome's influence is present. Family structures, gender roles, and domestic responsibilities were all codified. Romans expected children to obey, wives to manage households, and men to lead publicly. Modern social expectations still echo this even as norms have shifted. Inherited expectations about responsibility, respect, and conduct continue to shape personal choices. Behavior feels natural, but it is historically inherited. The Romans also mastered the art of belief. They did not merely enforce obedience, they made it seem necessary, inevitable, and desirable. The logic of the empire was internalized. People were conditioned to accept rules as common sense, to align their own desires with societal expectations. Today, marketing, governance, education, and social media rely on similar principles. We follow rules not only because they are enforced, but because we believe them to be right, normal, and essential. Rome's genius was ideological as much as practical. In daily routines, in work, in law, in education, in leisure, and in family life, the invisible architecture of Rome persists. We still follow paths designed to maintain order, encourage compliance, and structure social life. We internalize consequences, measure ourselves against hierarchies, and adhere to rituals that predate us by centuries. And while the physical empire has long since crumbled, its cognitive and cultural empire thrives. The mechanisms of Rome are everywhere, invisible, subtle, and powerful. From social expectation to ritual, from law to education, from visibility to self-regulation. Rome's influence survives because it became habitual. And recognizing these mechanisms is essential if we ever hope to reclaim autonomy over the rules we follow. If we hope to distinguish inherited obligation from conscious choice. One of the most pervasive and enduring Roman rules is the obsession with hierarchy. Romans believed that society functioned best when every individual understood their place. Senators led, citizens obeyed, freedmen contributed, slaves served. Social mobility existed, but only within strict limits. This obsession with defined roles was not just about control, it was about creating predictability. Modern society mirrors this obsession in countless ways. Corporate hierarchies, bureaucratic structures, job titles, and even social media rankings all reinforce the notion that some people are, or above, and some are below. We navigate these systems daily, internalizing a sense of order that feels logical, natural, and unquestionable. Rome made hierarchy seem inevitable, and centuries later, we rarely think to challenge it. Another mechanism that keeps Rome's influence alive is codified law. Roman legal thinking was meticulous. Every possible situation, no matter how minor, had a precedent, a procedure, or a prescribed response. This system provided order and predictability but also subtly enforced compliance. Modern society inherited this obsession with codification. Laws, regulations, policies, and rules govern virtually every aspect of life. From zoning laws to tax codes. From corporate regulations to school rules. We follow structured systems largely because they exist. The assumption is that if something is codified, it is correct. Few consider whether the rule itself is necessary. Rome taught us to mistake structure for morality, and the lesson endures today. Ritual, another Roman tool, also persists. Romans created ceremonies, feasts, and public events that were as much about social control as religious observance. Participation in these rituals signaled loyalty and reinforced social order. The logic was clear: repetition breeds normalization, and normalization breeds compliance. Today, we see the echoes of these rituals in office meetings, graduations, holiday traditions, and public celebrations. Even seemingly mundane customs, from saluting the flag to shaking hands, carry inherited logic from Roman ritual. Perform expected behavior, reinforce cohesion, and subtly internalize obedience. Visibility was critical in Roman enforcement. Public spaces like the forum, the baths, and the circus allowed peers to observe each other, creating social pressure to conform. Reputation was as powerful as law. Modern parallels are obvious. Social media, professional network, and public scrutiny all operate on the principle that behavior is regulated by observation. We act differently when someone is watching because Rome taught civilization that compliance is strongest when self-policed. Social enforcement is internalized, creating systems that maintain order even without coercion. Education, too, was a tool of Roman socialization. Roman schools emphasized memorization, discipline, and rhetorical mastery over inquiry or creativity. Obedience, respect for authority, and the mastery of formal skills were valued above innovation. This approach conditioned young minds to accept hierarchy and structured systems as natural. Modern schooling, though different in content, often replicates this logic. Standardized testing, rigid curricula, and classroom authority continue to emphasize compliance and achievement over curiosity and creative thinking. Rome's educational legacy trained citizens to internalize rules, and this mental framework persists. Time as structured by Rome remains another invisible influence. The Roman calendar, divisions of months and scheduling of civic duties imposed a rhythm on daily life. Work, religious observances, and leisure were all regimented. Modern workweeks, school schedules, deadlines, and even the obsession with punctuality are direct descendants of this temporal structuring. We live in preordained rhythms, feeling compelled to follow schedules as if they are natural rather than inherited constructs. Rome trained civilizations to submit to time as an instrument of order, and that conditioning survives in contemporary life. Rome also codified expectations around family and gender roles. Citizens were expected to conform to social norms, with men leading publicly and women managing households. Children were trained to obey. Slaves and freedmen understood their place in society. These rules were enforced socially, legally, and morally. Modern society, despite tremendous change, retains echoes of these expectations. Social pressure still shapes behavior, often subtly, reinforcing inherited roles and responsibilities. We internalize norms about family work and social conduct without questioning their origin, an invisible legacy of Roman thought. Even leisure was regulated by Roman rules. Public baths, games, and festivals were designed to maintain social cohesion while reinforcing hierarchy. Pleasure was structured, limited, and observed. Modern equivalents exist in organized sports, entertainment industries, and cultural rituals, which often serve dual purposes: enjoyment and social conformity. Rome understood that structured pleasure reinforces obedience, and centuries later, we continue to follow this template. Another mechanism of influence is the glorification of endurance and suffering. Romans praised resilience, patience, and perseverance as virtues. Struggle was considered morally refining. Modern societies inherit this notion in work culture, education, and social expectations. Overwork, delayed gratification, and tolerance of hardship are often celebrated. Many of us still wear exhaustion as a badge of honor, echoing values propagated by Rome. This internalized ethic encourages people to tolerate systems, institutions, and conditions they might otherwise challenge. Visibility, ritual, hierarchy, education, temporal order, gender expectations, structured leisure, and the glorification of endurance combine to form an invisible architecture of control. People follow rules because they feel natural, because deviation is socially uncomfortable, and because compliance has been normalized over centuries. Rome created systems that are invisible yet self-reinforcing, and modern society continues to function under these inherited structures. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Rome is the internalization of authority. Romans understood that power is strongest when it is unquestioned. Obedience that emerges from belief is more effective than obedience enforced through fear. Today, this principle manifests in workplaces, educational systems, governance, and even personal relationships. People complain not because of external punishment, but because social conditioning and internalized norms guide their actions. The invisible hand of Rome still shapes thought, behavior, and decision-making. Codified law, social expectation, ritual, hierarchy, structured leisure, education, and internalized authority all reveal a common thread: compliance that feels natural. We mistake inherited rules for rational choice. We accept conventions, roles, and hierarchies without questioning why they exist. Rome's genius was to normalize control so thoroughly that people police themselves. Modern life, from mundane routines to major societal structures, remains a testament to this invisible empire. Finally, the chapter explores the psychological consequences of these inherited rules. Humans develop habits, expectations, and moral frameworks based on repeated exposure to structured systems. Compliance becomes automatic. Deviation induces discomfort. Social norms are reinforced without conscious thought. Behavior is regulated, not only by law or supervision, but by internalized belief systems cultivated over centuries. Rome's rules persist not because they are rational or necessary, but because generations of humans have absorbed them, transmitted them, and perpetuated them. In essence, Rome's influence persists because it became internalized, habitual, and invisible. Obedience no longer requires enforcement when compliance is instinctive. The empire may have fallen physically, but its architecture of thought, ritual, and social structure thrives in the present. By examining the mechanisms of influence, we begin to see the threads connecting ancient Rome to modern behavior, culture, and governance. Awareness becomes the key to autonomy. And understanding these mechanisms allows for conscious choice, rather than unconscious compliance. One of the most pervasive Roman rules that survives is the obsession with hierarchy. Romans believed that society functioned best when each individual knew their place. Senators, citizens, freedmen, and slaves each had defined roles and responsibilities. Even mobility within these roles was constrained. This created predictability and social stability, but also internalized obedience. Modern life reflects this principle everywhere. Corporate hierarchies, educational structures, job titles, and social ranks are all invisible ladders. We climb them, measure ourselves against them, and define success in terms of position. This inherited framework shapes ambition, self-worth, and even personal relationships. Hierarchy feels natural because Rome trained humans to accept it as inevitable. Codified law was another mechanism that ensured longevity. Roman legal codes were remarkably comprehensive, addressing property, family, commerce, and criminal behavior. Some laws were rational, others were arbitrary, designed to reinforce authority. Today, the logic survives in bureaucracies, municipal ordinances, corporate policies, and procedural norms. We follow rules because they exist, not always because they are necessary. The internalized assumption that codification equals legitimacy is a direct legacy of Roman governance. Ritual was a subtler, yet equally powerful, mechanism of control. Romans orchestrated public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formal interactions to reinforce hierarchy, loyalty, and social cohesion. Repetition created normalization, and normalization created compliance. Modern life mirrors this in ways we barely recognize: office meetings, holiday traditions, academic ceremonies, and even mundane social rituals perpetuate the same principle. By repeating behaviors in structured settings, we internalize expectations, making adherence feel natural. Public visibility amplified these effects. Romans understood that people modify behavior when observed. The forum, baths, and amphitheaters were not just social spaces, they were instruments of surveillance. Reputation was as enforceable as law. Today, social media, professional networking, and communal scrutiny function on the same principle. We police ourselves because the gaze of others shapes behavior. Rome's insight, that compliance is strongest when self-policed, remains true today. Education reinforced these norms. Roman pedagogy emphasized discipline, memorization, and mastery of form, often at the expense of creativity or critical thinking. Students internalized obedience and learned to respect hierarchy. Modern schooling, though evolved, retains this pattern. Curricula emphasize measurable achievement, standardized testing, and authority over inquiry. The mental framework for internalized compliance, established in Roman schools, persists across centuries. Time structuring was another Roman innovation that survived. The Roman calendar, division of months, and scheduling of civic duties imposed rhythm on life. Work, religious observances, and leisure were regimented. Modern equivalents, workweeks, deadlines, class schedules, and timetables, reflect this temporal discipline. We follow these rhythms as if they are natural, forgetting that they were historically constructed to instill order. Family and social roles were codified as well. Romans defined gender and class responsibilities strictly. Men led publicly, women managed households, and children were trained to obey. Slaves and freedmen had clearly delineated duties. Modern life retains echoes of these roles. Social expectations shape how we act at home, at work, and in communities. Even as norms evolve, the underlying framework of role-based behavior is inherited from Rome, often unquestioned. Leisure, too, was regulated. Romans controlled public spaces and recreational activities to maintain cohesion and reinforce hierarchy. Fun was structured and observed. Today, organized sports, cultural rituals, and entertainment industries subtly replicate this logic. Structured pleasure reinforces social norms, teaches discipline, and perpetuates compliance. Rome taught that even joy can be harnessed to shape behavior. Romans glorified endurance, suffering, and delayed gratification. Struggle was considered morally refining. Resilience a virtue. Modern societies inherit this ethic. Overwork, delayed rewards, and perseverance are celebrated. Exhaustion and sacrifice are often worn as badges of honor, echoing values instilled by Rome. Internalized, these expectations encourage people to accept systems and conditions without question. Risibility, ritual hierarchy, education, temporal order, social roles, structured leisure, and the glorification of endurance all function together to create an invisible architecture of control. Individuals follow these rules because they feel natural, because deviation triggers discomfort, and because social and internalized mechanisms reinforce conformity. Rome perfected self-regulation. The empire may have fallen, but the blueprint for internalized compliance remains. Perhaps the most insidious legacy is the internalization of authority. Romans understood that power is strongest when unquestioned. Obedience rooted in belief is more effective than obedience enforced through fear. Today, workplaces, governments, and social structures leverage the same principle. Individuals comply not because of coercion, but because internalized norms, reinforced by education and social expectation, guide their actions. The architecture of thought constructed by Rome persists. Even subtle social interactions carry this influence. Greetings, dress codes, dining etiquette, and formalities echo centuries of inherited social expectations. Compliance is normalized, deviation is socially uncomfortable. We follow rules unconsciously, unaware of the historical origins embedded in our culture. Rome's invisible empire extends beyond laws and buildings into the daily habits of humans. The codification of behavior into observable patterns reinforced predictability. Rituals, ceremonies of daily life normalized conformity, making obedience instinctive. Education, law, and public visibility all intersected to make internalized compliance automatic. Modern society inherits these mechanisms in ways both obvious and subtle. Commuting routines, office protocols, school structures, and ceremonial observances all maintain order by repetition and expectation. Even the idea of moral obligation is shaped by Roman logic. Obedience, endurance, and conformity were equated with virtue. Success was measured by the ability to perform one's role and fulfill societal expectations. Today, compliance is similarly valorized. Following rules, meeting deadlines, and maintaining social decorum are seen as markers of morality and reliability. Rome trained generations to equate adherence with virtue. This association survives in modern life. Psychologically, these mechanisms produce automatic behavior. Humans internalize expectations, habits, and moral frameworks through repeated exposure to structured systems. Compliance becomes intuitive. Deviating from norms triggers discomfort, reinforcing obedience. Systems no longer require explicit enforcement, they rely on historical conditioning, habit, and internalized belief. The empire endures not through armies or walls, but through human behavior itself. By understanding these mechanisms, we see that much of what we consider natural, our expectations, routines, hierarchies, and behaviors, is historically inherited. Awareness is the first step toward autonomy. Recognition allows choice. Understanding the invisible influence of Rome reveals that many systems we obey are not inevitable, they are inherited. Chapter 3 sets the stage for examining how individuals and societies begin to bend, question, or resist these inherited rules, opening the door to conscious adaptation. The enduring genius of Rome, as Chapter 3 demonstrates, is that its rules persist because they became internalized. Obedience no longer requires enforcement when compliance is instinctive. The empire's architecture of thought, ritual, and social structure survives in modern routines, institutions, and cultural norms. Recognizing this is critical. It allows humanity to distinguish inherited obligation from conscious choice, and to imagine life governed by principles of deliberate intention, rather than unconscious adherence. One of the most pervasive Roman rules that still governs behavior is the strict adherence to hierarchy. The Romans structured every aspect of society around rank. Citizens, freedmen, slaves, senators, magistrates, and emperors all had clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Mobility existed but was limited and conditional. Modern society mirrors this in countless ways. Corporate hierarchies, professional titles, military ranks, and even social networks all reflect this logic. We climb, compare, and measure ourselves against these ladders. Success is defined by position and adherence to expectations rather than individual creativity or merit. Hierarchy feels natural because Rome trained the human mind to accept it as inevitable. Codified law was another tool through which Rome ensured lasting influence. Roman legal codes were extraordinarily detailed, governing property, family, commerce, crime, and civic behavior. Some laws were practical, while others were arbitrary mechanisms to maintain control. Modern governance, bureaucracy, and institutional policies echo this logic. Rules, regulations, and procedures guide behavior, often unquestioned, because we assume codification implies correctness. Compliance feels logical, though its origin may be centuries removed from necessity. Rome taught the world to equate structure with morality, and that lesson persists. Ritual reinforced compliance subtly yet powerfully. Public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formalized interactions maintained social cohesion and hierarchy. Participation in these rituals signaled loyalty and reinforced obedience. Modern life mirrors this in office meetings, graduations, cultural traditions, and even social niceties. Repetition normalizes behavior, and normalization produces instinctive adherence. Without conscious thought, people follow rules that have been repeated, observed, and institutionalized over centuries. Visibility was a crucial mechanism for control in Rome. Public behavior was constantly observed, whether in the forum, the baths, or the circus. Reputation carried weight equal to law. Today, this principle manifests in social media, professional networking, and public scrutiny. Humans adjust behavior under observation, internalizing the presence of the gaze. Compliance becomes self-regulated. Rome's insight, that the most enduring obedience is self-policed, remains relevant in the modern world. Education was a deliberate channel for reinforcing societal norms. Roman schools emphasized memorization, discipline, and mastery of form over curiosity or innovation. Students were trained to respect authority, follow rules, and internalize hierarchical expectations. Modern educational systems, though more expansive, retain these elements. Standardized testing, structured curricula, and authority-driven classrooms encourage compliance. Rome's legacy is visible in the internalized mental frameworks that guide behavior in schoolwork and social life. Time, as structured by Rome, became a subtle instrument of order. The Roman calendar divided months, assigned civic duties, and regimented festivals, embedding rhythm into daily life. Workweeks, school schedules, deadlines, and hourly planning are all modern descendants of this temporal structuring. We live according to inherited schedules that feel natural, but were historically constructed to enforce consistency and predictability. The Romans disciplined humanity through time itself, and we continue to follow that rhythm unconsciously. Family, gender, and social roles were strictly codified. Roman men led publicly, women managed households, and children were trained to obey. Slaves and freedmen understood their place and function. Modern society, despite shifts in gender norms and social mobility, still inherits echoes of these roles. Expectations around family, career, and social conduct guide behavior subtly, often unconsciously, enforcing compliance through cultural continuity rather than law. Leisure, too, was regulated. Public spaces, festivals, and recreational activities were orchestrated to reinforce social norms and hierarchy. Even enjoyment was structured and observed. Modern equivalents exist in organized sports, cultural events, and entertainment industries. Structured leisure continues to reinforce societal expectations. Discipline, hierarchy, and conformity are subtly encoded into play and celebration. Rome taught that eat and pleasure can maintain control. The glorification of endurance, suffering, and resilience is another enduring Roman principle. Romans praised patience, perseverance, and the ability to endure hardship as moral virtues. Today, overwork, delayed gratification, and perseverance remain celebrated in education, career, and social life. Exhaustion and sacrifice are markers of character. These internalized expectations encourage compliance, ensuring that people continue to participate in systems, even those that may no longer serve their best interests. Public visibility, ritual hierarchy, temporal discipline, social roles, structured leisure, and the glorification of endurance work together to create an invisible framework of compliance. Individuals internalize these rules, making obedience automatic. People adhere not only to explicit laws but also to social expectations and inherited norms. The empire endures not through armies or walls, but through the human mind. Another critical aspect of Roman influence is the internalization of authority. Power is most enduring when unquestioned. Romans understood this. Obedience rooted in belief is far more effective than compliance enforced through fear. Modern workplaces, educational systems, and government institutions employ the same principle. Internalized authority governs behavior far more efficiently than external enforcement. The architecture of thought constructed by Rome continues to guide human behavior, subtly shaping choices, expectations, and social dynamics. Even minor social conventions trace their lineage to Rome. Greetings, dress codes, etiquette, and ceremonial conduct all encode hierarchical and behavioral expectations. Compliance feels natural, deviation feels uncomfortable, and internalized belief reinforces continued adherence. Rome's influence is not confined to law or architecture. It permeates the everyday choices and interactions of modern life. Codification of behavior, public visibility, ritual education, and glorification of endurance collectively produce automatic, habitual obedience. Norms are internalized, repeated, and transmitted across generations. Compliance becomes instinctive, self-reinforcing, and unquestioned. Modern institutions, schools, governments, corporations, religious organizations, and cultural systems continue to employ these mechanisms, often unconsciously, perpetuating Rome's influence centuries after the empire's fall. Even our sense of morality is shaped by these inherited rules. Romans equated adherence to law, ritual, and hierarchy with virtue. Obedience and endurance were moral achievements. Today, societal norms reinforce similar principles. Compliance, discipline, and achievement are celebrated as markers of good character. The association of conformity with virtue remains deeply embedded in human psychology. Rome's genius was ideological as well as practical. Laws, rituals, hierarchies, and social norms were embedded into human behavior. Compliance became instinctive. The empire may have fallen, but its influence persists in daily routines, thought patterns, and societal expectations. Chapter 4 illustrates the invisible, persistent, and deeply psychological reach of Rome, a reach that continues to shape modern life in ways we rarely acknowledge. Awareness is key. Recognizing that much of what we consider natural is inherited allows us to question, adapt, or redefine the rules we follow. Understanding Rome's mechanisms of influence, Hierarchy, law, ritual, visibility, education, temporal discipline, social roles, leisure endurance, and internalized authority. Provides insight into the invisible architecture of modern life. It also offers the possibility of autonomy. To act consciously rather than follow inherited scripts unconsciously. One of the most enduring Roman legacies is the organization of society into clearly defined hierarchies. Citizens, freedmen, slaves, senators, magistrates, and emperors all had designated roles, responsibilities, and privileges. This system ensured predictability, order, and compliance. Modern equivalents abound. Corporate hierarchies, professional titles, educational rankings, and social networks all reflect the same principle. People compare themselves to others, measure worth by position, and internalize expectations tied to rank. Hierarchy feels natural, because the human mind has been conditioned over generations to accept structured order as inevitable, a direct inheritance from Rome. Codified law was another method of durable influence. Roman legislation was meticulous, governing property, family commerce, crime and civic duty. Some laws were rational, designed for social stability, others were arbitrary tools of control. Modern governance, from municipal regulations to corporate policies, mirrors this logic. Rules exist and we follow them, often unconsciously, because centuries of inherited belief teach that codification equates to legitimacy. Rome trained humanity to equate compliance with morality, and that principle continues to govern behavior. Ritual reinforced obedience subtly yet effectively. Romans created ceremonies, festivals, and public events to strengthen social cohesion and hierarchy. Participation signaled loyalty and reinforced norms. Modern society mirrors this principle through office meetings, school events, holiday traditions and social customs. Repetition normalizes behavior, creating instinctive adherence. By engaging in structured routines, humans internalize expectations without conscious effort. The principle is simple: repeated. Observable action solidifies norms. Visibility, a cornerstone of Roman influence, shaped behavior in public spaces. Forums, theaters, and marketplaces were arenas of observation. Reputation was as powerful as law. Modern parallels are evident in social media, professional networking, and public scrutiny. People self-regulate because the gaze of others enforces compliance. Rome's insight, that the strongest obedience emerges from self-policing, remains deeply embedded in contemporary life. Education was another channel for internalizing rules. Roman schools emphasized memorization, discipline, and mastery of form over inquiry and creativity. Students absorbed hierarchical thinking, obedience and societal expectations. Modern education systems, though broader in scope, often perpetuate similar patterns. Standardized testing, structured curricula, and classroom authority all reinforce internalized compliance. Rome's legacy is evident in the cognitive frameworks that guide behavior and thought in school, work, and social life. Temporal order was a subtle yet powerful instrument of control. The Roman calendar, a structuring of months, and the scheduling of civic duties imposed rhythm on life. Modern workweeks, deadlines, school schedules, and time management are inherited manifestations of this system. Time, structured as an instrument of discipline, conditions behavior. Humans adhere to temporal frameworks unconsciously, internalizing the patterns established centuries ago. Rome trained civilizations to obey schedules, and this discipline persists. Social and family roles were rigorously codified. Men led publicly, women managed households, children obeyed authority, and slaves and freedmen had clearly defined duties. While norms have shifted dramatically, remnants persist. Expectations around gender, family, and social conduct subtly shape choices and behavior. Modern humans still navigate inherited social scripts that reinforce hierarchy and compliance, often unconsciously. Leisure and recreation were also tools for social control. Romans structured public spaces, games, and festivals to maintain cohesion and reinforce hierarchy. Modern equivalents exist in organized sports, entertainment, and cultural rituals. Structured leisure subtly teaches discipline. hierarchy, and social norms. Rome recognized that even pleasure could be harnessed to shape behavior, and centuries later, similar mechanisms persist. The glorification of endurance and suffering remains a key legacy. Romans praised patience, resilience, and the ability to withstand hardship. Modern societies celebrate overwork, delayed gratification, and perseverance. Exhaustion and sacrifice are often valued as moral achievements. These inherited expectations ensure that humans tolerate conditions and systems that may no longer serve their best interests. Endurance has become both a social expectation and a personal ethic, subtly reinforcing compliance. Even minor social conventions, greetings, dress codes, etiquette, and ceremonial conduct encode hierarchical and behavioral expectations. Compliance feels natural, deviation triggers discomfort. Romans designed these practices to become habitual, and modern humans continue to follow them unconsciously. The invisible empire of Rome is not only law or architecture. It is embedded in behavior, thought, and social interaction. Codification, ritual, hierarchy, temporal discipline, social roles, structured leisure, glorification of endurance, and internalized authority collectively produce instinctive compliance. Repetition, observation, and internalized belief maintain adherence. Systems no longer need constant enforcement, they are self-reinforcing. Modern institutions, schools, governments, corporations, religious organizations, and cultural frameworks continue to employ these mechanisms, often unconsciously perpetuating Roman influence. Even moral frameworks are shaped by these inherited rules. Romans equated obedience, adherence to ritual, and endurance with virtue. Today, society continues to celebrate compliance, discipline, and achievement as moral markers. The association between adherence and morality remains deeply embedded in human psychology. Chapter 5 illuminates how Rome's influence is not only social and legal but psychological and cognitive. It penetrates the way humans think, perceive, and evaluate behavior. Obedience becomes instinctive, hierarchy feels natural, endurance and ritual are valorized. Modern society continues to operate under invisible scripts established 2 millennia ago. Recognizing these mechanisms is crucial for understanding behavior and reclaiming autonomy. Awareness allows humans to question inherited rules, distinguish between natural and historical norms, and make conscious choices. Understanding Rome's mechanisms of influence, hierarchy, law, ritual, visibility, education, temporal order, social roles, leisure, endurance, and internalized authority, offers a path toward autonomy. By illuminating the invisible structures that guide behavior, Chapter 5 sets the stage for examining how individuals and societies can challenge, adapt, or resist inherited norms. Rome's genius was both practical and ideological. Its rules became internalized, habitual, and invisible. Obedience no longer required armies, magistrates, or enforcement, the human mind became the instrument. The empire's architecture of thought, ritual, and social structure endures, shaping modern routines, expectations, and institutions. Chapter 5 demonstrates that the strongest empires survive not through conquest of land, but through conquest of the mind, a conquest that persists long after physical power has faded. One of the most enduring lessons of Rome is the power of hierarchy. Romans believed that clearly defined roles were essential for societal stability. Every citizen, freedman, slave, senator, and magistrate had a specific place, responsibility, and expectation. Social mobility was limited and often conditional. Modern society mirrors this structure through corporate ladders, educational rankings, professional titles, and social hierarchies. We unconsciously measure ourselves against others, internalizing a sense of order and rank. Success is not just measured by achievement, but by position within a social structure. This internalized hierarchy feels natural, because Rome trained generations to accept it as inevitable, embedding it deeply into human perception. Codified law reinforced order and compliance. Roman legislation covered nearly every aspect of life, from commerce and property to family and civic duty. While many laws were rational, others were designed to assert control and maintain hierarchy. Modern society inherits this principle in legal systems, municipal regulations, corporate policies, and procedural frameworks. We follow rules not only because they are enforced, but because we assume that codification confers legitimacy. Compliance becomes habitual, and questioning rules often feels uncomfortable or socially risky. Rome demonstrated that structure itself could be mistaken for moral authority, a lesson we continue to live by. Rituals were equally crucial in sustaining influence. Roman public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formalized social interactions reinforced loyalty, hierarchy, and social cohesion. Participation was not optional, it was expected, and deviation was noticeable. Modern life reflects this principle in graduation ceremonies, office meetings, holiday traditions, and social customs. The repetition of these rituals normalizes behavior, creating instinctive adherence. Humans internalize these patterns, following them without conscious reflection. Rome's insight was that repetition and observability create compliance, a principle that remains as powerful today as it was 2 millennia ago. Public visibility amplified adherence to rules. In Rome, forums, baths, amphitheaters, and marketplaces functioned as arenas of social observation. Reputation was a form of social enforcement, often as powerful as law itself. Modern parallels exist in social media, professional networks, and public scrutiny. We adjust behavior when we know we are being observed, regulating ourselves even in the absence of formal authority. Rome understood that internalized compliance, the kind born from anticipated judgment, produces stronger and more enduring obedience than coercion alone. Education was a deliberate tool for internalizing norms. Roman schools emphasized memorization, discipline, and rhetorical skill over creativity or inquiry. Students learned to respect authority, master form, and internalize hierarchical expectations. Modern education systems, despite innovations, retain these patterns. Standardized testing, structured curricula, and classroom authority reinforce compliance. Rome's legacy is visible in the mental frameworks guiding human behavior in classrooms, workplaces, and social settings. The ability to internalize rules, anticipate consequences, and perform expected behaviors is a product of this historical conditioning. Time management and scheduling were subtle instruments of control. The Roman calendar, the division of months, and the structuring of civic duties imposed rhythm on life. Modern work weeks, school schedules, deadlines, and punctuality norms are inherited from this temporal discipline. Humans adhere to schedules as if natural, rarely questioning their origin. Rome trained societies to organize life according to preordained temporal frameworks, embedding discipline into daily routines. The persistence of this practice illustrates how deeply internalized the empire's rules became. Social roles, gender norms, and family structures were rigorously enforced. Men led publicly, women managed households, and children were expected to obey authority. Slaves and freedmen had prescribed duties and behaviors. While modern norms have evolved, the underlying framework of role-based behavior persists. Cultural expectations, professional responsibilities, and social conduct still echo the boundaries Rome established, guiding behavior in subtle yet powerful ways. The empire's influence extended into the intimate spaces of family and personal life, conditioning thought and action from childhood onward. Leisure was structured to reinforce social norms. Romans regulated public spaces, festivals, and recreational activities to maintain order and cohesion. Even pleasure was framed in terms of expectation and observation. Modern equivalents exist in organized sports, cultural celebrations, and entertainment industries. Structured leisure subtly encodes discipline, hierarchy, and social conformity. Rome recognized that even enjoyment can shape behavior, and modern society continues this tradition without realizing its historical roots. The glorification of endurance, resilience, and suffering also endures. Romans praised patience, fortitude, and the capacity to withstand hardship as moral virtues. Modern societies continue to celebrate overwork, perseverance, and delayed gratification. Sacrifice and endurance are often seen as moral achievements, reinforcing compliance with systems and expectations. The internalization of these principles encourages humans to tolerate conditions they might otherwise resist, sustaining structures long after their original purpose has faded. Even minor social conventions, greetings, dress codes, etiquette, and ceremonial conduct encode hierarchical expectations and social norms. Compliance feels natural, deviation triggers discomfort. Romans designed these conventions to become habitual. Today, people continue to follow inherited scripts unconsciously, shaping interactions, decision-making, and perceptions of morality. The invisible empire of Rome is not only about law or architecture, it is embedded in behavior, thought, and everyday life. Codification, ritual hierarchy, temporal discipline, social roles, structured leisure, glorification of endurance, and internalized authority collectively create instinctive compliance. Humans follow rules automatically because they have been internalized over centuries. Systems no longer need constant enforcement, they are self-reinforcing. Modern institutions, schools, governments, corporations, religious organizations, and cultural frameworks continue to employ these mechanisms unconsciously, perpetuating Roman influence. Even moral frameworks are shaped by these inherited structures. Romans equated obedience and endurance with virtue. Today, societal expectations continue to valorize compliance, discipline, and achievement. Humans internalize these norms, equating adherence with morality. Chapter 6 demonstrates that Rome's influence is as cognitive as it is social, shaping thought, perception, and evaluation of behavior. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial. Awareness allows humans to question inherited rules, distinguish between natural and historical norms, and make conscious choices. Rome's methods of influence, hierarchy, codification, ritual visibility, education, temporal structuring, social roles, leisure endurance, and internalized authority, remain embedded in modern life. By revealing the invisible architecture of control, Chapter 6 illuminates how deeply these systems penetrate cognition and behavior. Rome's genius was practical and ideological. Its rules became internalized, habitual, and invisible. Obedience did not require constant supervision. Humans internalized the empire's logic. The architecture of thought, ritual, and social structure survives, shaping modern routines, expectations, and institutions. Chapter 6 demonstrates that the most enduring empires conquer, not just land, but the mind itself, a conquest that persists long after the fall of physical power. One of the most pervasive legacies of Rome is hierarchy. Romans structured society so that every citizen, freedman, slave, senator, and magistrate had a clearly defined role. Mobility existed, but it was constrained and conditional. Modern society mirrors this through corporate ladders, academic rankings, professional titles, and social networks. We unconsciously compare ourselves to others, measure our worth by position, and internalize societal expectations. Hierarchy feels natural, because the human mind has been conditioned over generations to accept order as inevitable. The invisible blueprint of Rome's social engineering continues to govern our perceptions of success, authority, and respect. Codified law reinforced obedience. Roman legislation meticulously regulated property, family, commerce, and civic behavior. Some laws were practical, others served as instruments of control. Today, we follow municipal regulations, workplace policies, and procedural frameworks largely because they exist and are codified. Compliance feels logical, and deviation feels socially risky. The Roman principle, that codification implies legitimacy, remains a guiding force in modern governance, education, and corporate structures. We follow rules because they are formalized, rarely questioning whether they are rational or necessary. Ritual was another subtle yet powerful mechanism of control. Romans used public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formal social interactions to reinforce loyalty, cohesion, and hierarchy. Participation was expected, visible, and socially significant. Modern equivalents include graduation ceremonies, office meetings, national holidays, and cultural traditions. Repetition normalizes behavior, creating instinctive adherence. By participating in these rituals, humans internalize rules without conscious reflection. The principle is simple yet enduring. Repeated, observable action embeds compliance into the psyche. Visibility amplified adherence. Roman forums, baths, theaters, and marketplaces were arenas of social observation. Reputation functioned as a form of enforcement, often rivaling formal law. Today, the same principle operates through social media, professional networks, and public scrutiny. People regulate behavior because they anticipate judgment, internalizing norms as part of their own identity. Rome demonstrated that the most durable obedience arises when individuals police themselves, a principle still effective in modern life. Education was deliberately used to internalize rules. Roman schools prioritized memorization, discipline, and rhetorical mastery over creativity or inquiry. Students absorbed hierarchical thinking, obedience, and social norms. Modern schooling, despite evolution in pedagogy, retains elements of this model: standardized testing, structured curricula, and authority-driven classrooms reinforce internalized compliance. Rome's legacy is visible in the mental frameworks that guide behavior across life, from childhood through professional adulthood. Temporal discipline was another invisible instrument of control. The Roman calendar, division of months, and scheduling of civic duties imposed rhythm on life. Modern workweeks, class schedules, deadlines, and time management echo this structure. Humans adhere to schedules as if they are natural, rarely questioning their origins. Rome trained civilizations to internalize temporal discipline, embedding order into daily life. These inherited rhythms subtly govern productivity, social coordination, and personal behavior. Social and family roles were codified and enforced. Roman men led publicly, women managed households, children obeyed authority, and slaves and freedmen had defined duties. Modern society, despite cultural evolution, retains echoes of these roles. Social norms shape behavior, decisions, and interactions in ways that often go unnoticed. Expectations around family, gender, and social conduct continue to reinforce hierarchy, subtly maintaining the framework Rome established. Leisure and public enjoyment were carefully regulated. Romans structured festivals, games, and public activities to reinforce social order and cohesion. Modern society mirrors this through organized sports, entertainment industries, and cultural rituals. Structured leisure encodes discipline, hierarchy, and social conformity. Even pleasure becomes a vehicle for reinforcing social norms, an insight the Romans understood and implemented with precision. The glorification of endurance, resilience, and suffering is another enduring Roman principle. Romans valued patience, perseverance, and the ability to withstand hardship as moral virtues. Modern culture continues to celebrate overwork, perseverance, and delayed gratification. Sacrifice and endurance are praised, reinforcing internalized compliance. The internalization of these principles ensures that humans tolerate structures and conditions long after their original purpose has faded. Even minor social conventions, greetings, dress codes, etiquette, and ceremonial behavior, encode hierarchical expectations. Compliance feels instinctive, deviation creates discomfort. Romans designed these practices to become habitual, shaping behavior subtly yet powerfully. Modern humans continue to follow inherited scripts unconsciously, demonstrating the empire's persistent psychological influence. Codification, ritual, hierarchy, temporal discipline, social roles, structured leisure, endurance, and internalized authority collectively produce instinctive compliance. Humans adhere automatically because these systems are embedded in thought and habit. Systems no longer require constant enforcement, they are self-perpetuating. Schools, governments, corporations, religious institutions, and cultural frameworks all continue to employ these mechanisms, maintaining Rome's invisible influence. Even moral frameworks reflect Roman logic. Obedience, adherence to ritual, and endurance were equated with virtue. Modern society celebrates compliance, discipline and achievement as moral markers. Humans internalize these associations, often unconsciously, shaping both behavior and self-perception. Rome's rules endure not only externally but within thought, emotion, and cognition. Rome's genius was practical and ideological. Its rules were embedded into behavior, thought and social systems. Obedience no longer needed enforcement because it had been internalized. The empire survives in the human mind, subtly guiding choices, shaping expectations, and structuring daily life. Chapter 7 demonstrates that the most enduring conquests are not of territory, but of cognition, the empire that continues within us today. One of the most enduring legacies of Rome is hierarchy. Romans meticulously structure society so that every citizen, freedman, slave, senator, and magistrate had a defined role. Social mobility existed, but it was constrained and conditional. Modern society mirrors the structure through corporate ladders, academic rankings, professional titles, and even social media hierarchies. People unconsciously measure themselves against others, internalize social expectations, and define success according to position. Hierarchy feels natural because the human mind has been conditioned over generations to accept order as inevitable. Rome's invisible blueprint continues to govern how we perceive authority, value and status. Codified law reinforced compliance and internalized order. Roman legal codes meticulously regulated property, family, commerce, civic duty, and morality. Some laws were rational, others serve as instruments of control, reinforcing hierarchy and social cohesion. Modern governance, workplace policies, and institutional regulations mirror this principle. People follow rules not only because they are enforced, but because they are codified. Codification creates legitimacy, which encourages habitual adherence. Rome taught societies to equate structured rules with morality, a lesson that remains embedded in modern thought. Ritual was a subtle yet powerful mechanism of influence. Public ceremonies, religious festivals, and formal social interactions reinforced loyalty, hierarchy and social cohesion. Participation was both expected and visible. Modern society mirrors this principle through graduations, office ceremonies, national maules, and social customs. Repetition normalizes behavior, creating instinctive adherence. By performing repeated actions, humans internalize expectations without conscious reflection. Rome's insight was clear: repeated, observable practices embed obedience into the psyche. Visibility amplified compliance. Roman forums, baths, theaters, and marketplaces functioned as arenas of observation. Reputation acted as social enforcement, often more powerful than law itself. Modern parallels exist in social media, professional networks, and public scrutiny. People regulate behavior because they anticipate judgment, internalizing norms as part of their identity. Rome demonstrated that the strongest and most enduring obedience arises from self-policing, a principle that remains deeply embedded in contemporary life. Education was used to internalize societal rules and expectations. Roman schools emphasized memorization, discipline, and mastery of form over creativity or inquiry. Students absorbed hierarchical thinking, respect for authority, and social norms. Modern education, despite evolving pedagogy, retains these patterns: standardized testing, structured curricula, and authority-driven classrooms reinforce internalized compliance. Rome's legacy persists in the mental frameworks guiding behavior, thought, and social interaction. Temporal discipline was another tool of control. The Roman calendar, the structuring of months, and civic scheduling imposed rhythm on life. Modern workweeks, class schedules, deadlines, and punctuality norms reflect this system. Humans adhere to schedules unconsciously, rarely questioning their historical origin. Rome trained civilizations to internalize temporal discipline, embedding order into daily routines. The persistence of these patterns demonstrates the enduring reach of Roman systems. Social and family roles were codified and enforced. Men led publicly. Women managed households, children obeyed authority, and slaves and freedmen had prescribed duties. Modern norms have evolved, But cultural expectations continue to echo these frameworks. Social roles shape behavior, decision-making, and interaction, subtly maintaining the hierarchical structures Rome established. The empire's influence extended into intimate spaces, conditioning thought and action from early childhood. Leisure was structured to reinforce social norms. Romans regulated public spaces, festivals, and recreational activities to maintain cohesion. Even enjoyment was framed by hierarchy and observation. Modern parallels exist in organized sports, cultural events, and entertainment industries. Structured leisure teaches discipline, hierarchy, and conformity. Rome recognized that pleasure served as a subtle mechanism of social control, a principle that survives today. The glorification of endurance, resilience, and suffering is another enduring principle. Romans praised patience, perseverance, and the capacity to withstand hardship as moral virtues. Modern society continues to celebrate overwork, perseverance, and delayed gratification. Sacrifice is often valued as a marker of character. These internalized expectations encourage individuals to tolerate structures and systems, long after their original purpose has faded. Endurance remains a moral and social currency. Even minor social conventions, greetings, dress codes, liquid, and ceremonial behavior, encode hierarchy and expected norms. Compliance feels instinctive, deviation triggers discomfort. Romans designed these practices to become habitual, influencing behavior subtly but powerfully. Modern humans continue to follow these inherited scripts unconsciously, demonstrating the empire's persistent psychological reach. Codification, ritual hierarchy, temporal discipline, social roles, structured leisure, endurance, and internalized authority collectively produce instinctive compliance. People follow these rules automatically because they are embedded in cognition and habit. Systems no longer need enforcement, they are self-reinforcing. Modern institutions, educational systems, governments, corporations, religious organizations, and cultural frameworks continue to perpetuate these mechanisms, extending Rome's influence centuries after its fall. Even moral frameworks are shaped by Roman logic. Obedience, ritual adherence, and endurance were equated with virtue. Today, society celebrates discipline, compliance, and achievement as moral markers. Humans internalize these associations, shaping behavior, identity, and self-perception. Rome's rules endure not only in laws and architecture, but within thought, emotion, and daily decision-making.